Thanks very much, Amanda. Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. And before I move on, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I'm Warwick Sommer. I'm going to run through a presentation this afternoon looking at, more broadly, agility in innovation. What I'd like to do is cover off some of the ways that AMP Control has dealt with the need to be agile in this space, and ideally provide the audience with some takeouts on things that I suggest you could consider and ideally actually implement in your business to support becoming more agile in innovation. So one of the things that I wanted to start off with was really just putting a peg in the ground of the inevitability and the constancy of change that sits in front of us. And from that starting point, I think it's really important to appreciate that being agile in innovation is really no different to being agile in the face of all of the external forces and internal forces that most organisations face. So change is on us, we can't do anything about that. I think one of the great themes that you need to lean into when you want to think about innovation or modifying your business is the truism is exactly that. You can't change and be the same. So thinking about being agile is in itself an acknowledgement that you need to start doing things differently because you can't change and stay the same. And there's a real importance and an imperative to think about looking at things in different ways. Again, it's the change theme. If you're not prepared to challenge the status quo and what you actually do, then you're not going to go too far. I think there's also a very strong fundamental need to resolve to do better, to actually want to change. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to actually lean into the challenges of doing things differently, what it might mean for the organisation, its employees, its culture, then they're the sorts of things that need to be considered that all lead towards agility in that space. And most importantly as well, there's always going to be times when there's hard calls to make. So I guess that's why we're leaders in what we do. A really traditional approach to innovation is to really think about building a team. And we've already heard in parts today about the difficulty right now in finding talent. We can't buy the talent that we need in our R&D program at the moment. It's next to impossible. So we need to think about alternatives. But traditionally, you have a market that provides you with the ability to buy and build the team. You often rely on your internal subject matter experts, and it's a very internally focused model. And it has been really successful, but there's limits to what you can do, and you need to be open to alternatives. So what's some of the things that's great about this traditional build your own, do your own, know your own type model? Great for internal capability development, pathways and buying people in. You grow the team by hiring traditionally. There's also pathways, and it keeps IP inside the business because you're doing it all yourself. And issues around and concerns around IP ownership are often one of the things that make it difficult to consider other options in this space. Some of the cons though, the build your own team model doesn't work when things change and you need to contract your team. It's quite inflexible, so that's not a great spot to be, and that happens in cycles. It can also be slow. It's a little more linear if you have to get the talent and then you develop them through and apply them to projects, etc. And something that's very important, if you're only considering what you know by the people in your business, in your own team, there can be at times a limited diversity of ideas. And one that we have to be very careful in our business, don't let people fall in love with their own ideas. That's where, that honeymoon where you're falling in love with your own ideas can end up in a pretty bad place. So what I want to talk about is just the first part of a case study, a series of case studies, is a model that was thrust upon us by opportunity and urgency in equal measures. So some of you will be aware of AMP Control's development of a ventilator for New South Wales Health, and I want to showcase a few elements of what we did differently there in the context of both being agile, but as well as that, developing a new way inside our business to look at innovating and developing new solutions going forward. So it's a once-in-a-career burning platform. I've never seen anything like that in my working career, where there was a fundamental alignment of everybody involved in every element of the project of beating this evil, this COVID thing that we were learning that was amongst us and that we felt we had to work hard to overcome as a team. That singular focus I've never seen before. So that was amazing. It also resulted in a new approach for us. We threw more resources at this than we've done in any R&D program in the history of the business, and started to do things in a different way because we had to. We had very limited time, and the social need and the alignment was enormous. We ironically found we had to stop people working on the project as opposed to ask them to work on the project. So they were putting in hours and weren't telling us what was going on because they just didn't want to take the foot off. So that was really interesting. The project ultimately was successful. We produced 14 of that particular model of ventilator as part of what we needed to do to get to a certain milestone, and engagement with New South Wales Health was fantastic. So we achieved that. It's sort of cool that we never actually got to make lots of ventilators, and why didn't we? Because New South Wales Health approach to supporting the community was so successful that we didn't end up with thousands of people in ICU needing to be ventilated. So one of the best projects that kind of never went anywhere, if you know what I mean, on a big scale. What was different? Well, we actually had up to 60 people working on the project at one point. That's crazy in terms of numbers. We decided that if we put all of our eggs in one basket, as a more traditional model may have been, and that failed, then we were going to really be stuck in terms of responding to the call to arms. So we set up 4 discrete solution streams, teamed by different skill sets. One of them at one end of the scale was an integration of industrial equipment, not medical, but industrial equipment. At the other end, the 4th, was one of our engineers believed there was a new methodology to mechanically ventilate that could be developed. So that was more pure R&D, or more research, I suppose. So anyway, we ended up running the 4 different streams, and one of those prevailed, which was the integration stream. I can't understate the importance of collaboration, and in thinking about that, one of the key differences in this project and things we've done since is making a very active decision about what you choose not to do. So our traditional approach would have been, AMP Control has incredible resources, incredibly smart people. We could have done this ourselves, and it would have taken longer, and I'm not quite sure we would have got where we got to by just internalising it. So we went out and said, well, who are the sorts of organisations, who are the sorts of people that we need to help us go faster? How do we break the traditional model? So the Uni of Newcastle was really important, particularly early on, in thinking about some of the research that we needed to do to understand what's a ventilator. That was a fundamental point. And the 2 key collaborators were New Ventures and Safe Earth, and we chose those organisations because they had elements of capability that we thought may have lended themselves to where we needed to go. We didn't say we're going to take them on because they have 3 electrical engineers and 1 mechanical engineer. It wasn't that. It was an ethos. We knew we could work well with them together, and the best part was we made a great choice, and they challenged us the whole way through, really pushed us. And again, different to traditional, it's not so outside of manufacturing, for example, certainly not in software and others. But we needed to think about a sprint-based approach, where the traditional model might have been, you start at the start and you commit and you go right to the end and pop out and say, how do we do? Well, we had no alternatives other than to really sprint, and our sprints were day or days. So you may have heard from the first phone call that Rod got through to day 11, we proved we knew what a ventilator was and we could ventilate something. 7 days after that, we could ventilate something to the TGA's emergency requirements. So 18 days from dead cold to a ventilating solution that met a standard that was only capable by taking a very, very different approach.
AMP Control has been solving difficult problems for over 50 years. We negotiate complicated technical and regulatory environments and work across multiple sectors, including energy, infrastructure and resources around the globe. From first principles to the final product, we have the pedigree to put solutions on the table and the capability to deliver them at scale. With the COVID-19 pandemic unfolding, the New South Wales Ministry of Health engaged us to design, test and manufacture 600 ventilators to augment existing hospital supplies. Our team of engineers worked tirelessly to successfully meet the brief. We delivered a functional ventilator prototype to the John Hunter Hospital to be tested in its simulation laboratory by medical and clinical specialists in 18 days. During this time, AMP Control also designed and manufactured medical face shields to health specifications with an initial order of 3,000 delivered to Hunter New England Health.
I am immensely proud of how the AMP Control team mobilised its deep technology and engineering capability together with its advanced production facilities to deliver the life-saving ventilators to the New South Wales Government. This is a testament to the power of Australian ingenuity and the importance of Australian product innovation and manufacturing.
Thank you. So the machine that Rod was standing next to there was affectionately known as a gingerbread house. That was the first one that we made. The one that was in the earlier graphic was the fourth generation. What the Ventisys program or project taught us was a stack of things that proved we could do things quite differently to the traditional model, and we were then able to reflect on how some of that came together. One of the key things that allowed us to go as far and fast in a non-traditional role was really appreciating how we engaged stakeholders. So again, it wasn't fall in love with your own ideas, circle the wagons, get your own subject matter experts. We really had to lean on others to help us understand how to be more agile and develop faster. And I've just shown up there the innovation continuum. I think it's really, really relevant in this space, and it impacts every organisation. To the left is impossible, and to the right is required. And the innovation continuum and the rate of change from left to right is so fast nowadays. So wind back to thinking of, what was the telecommunications ideas, good old Maxwell Smart and the shoe phone. Impossible. That was Hollywood. It would never happen. Now we've got things in our mobile phones, or they keep popping up, and we just expect that they land. Technologically, they are really difficult, but we just expect it now, and then it becomes required, and off you go. So understanding how that impacts what goes on, and then being on top of your engagement is really important. So one of the things that the stakeholder engagement allowed us to do was really understand what did we need to do differently, and very importantly, what do we need to leave behind, because it wasn't important to get us to the point we wanted to in this sprint or the outcome. As I said, the traditional approaches focus on more internalised approaches. What we found was as soon as you start really fleshing out the external stakeholders and where they need you to get to, all of a sudden, it's sort of no surprise you can actually land the result. We had incredible engagement from New South Wales Health, New South Wales Health Infrastructure, and ultimately the TGA, who really, when we turned up as a mining company and said we've got a medical device, I'm sure they were sitting there scratching their head thinking this must be the April Fool's Day, what's going on? But they ended up being fantastic in terms of guidance for us. And the voice of customer is that bit that really sews it all together. Across my businesses, really push this concept of voice of customer. It really informs everything that you need to do. So, Amanda mentioned at the start ResTech. ResTech is a formal joint venture that AMP Controls had with the University of Newcastle since 2004, and it was put in place to be a two-way thing, to allow us to reach in and get research done, but also it was a conduit to bring great people out of university into our business. When we were sort of reviewing where we got into with the Ventisys project, we thought that there was a different way that we could stand up the things that we were going to do going forward. And we've defined 5 phases in what we do in our R&D streams. They're linked loosely to the technology readiness level scale, if you know TRL. And this is just put in there. We've done a recent large pitch to our innovation steerco on a solution which is an intrinsically safe LED lighting and environmental monitoring system for mining applications. And it was the first time we really applied a very different approach, a very agile approach to both problem formulation, including key stakeholders, and then thinking about how we've been working through the developments, which is, in this particular instance, forced us to pivot a couple of times when tech issues have arisen, or we found that the hypothesis of where we thought we would get to isn't technically possible, or other things have come up, maybe feedback from customers, etc. So there's elements of design thinking that inform the model, and what it does is allow us to get to a position which is the lowest technical risk that we can accept at a certain point in time, and also engaging enough of the right people to ensure we don't fall in love with our own ideas or don't get caught with that concept of we know boats. because the externalising of relevant stakeholders helps us move further and faster. I also want to, I mentioned this at a strategy day yesterday at work, and I thought it was an important one for here too. This stakeholder engagement and the need to think differently about who's in a team is fundamentally important to moving quickly. So I was in the States some years ago, and I was told of an example of a different approach to team formation. This particular organisation managed a network of transmission lines, and it was in a part of America where at times they get an impact of moist marine air and cold air meeting, and they get an ice storm. When the ice storm hits, ice forms on these transmission lines, and if it builds up enough, it'll snap the lines, taking out suburbs, etc. So from a transmission company perspective, that's a pretty bad outcome. So they thought, well, we'll just get the usual crew together and we'll work out how to fix this. So all the engineers got in a circle, but what they did was they actually invited an accountant in, and I don't know why. I actually don't know why that happened. Anyway, the engineers are sort of powering on with solution mode, and the accountant said, "You need Yogi Bear." And they thought, this person, they're crazy. Turned out the accountant said, well, I remember as a kid when Yogi Bear wanted to get the beehive, he used to shake the tree and it fell down. So you need to shake the lines. And they went, hang on. And that's the context of crazy adjacent. Often next to any crazy idea is a pearl that may land some great outcomes. So the solution was, when the ice storms occurred, they flew helicopters up and down the lines, and the downdraft just blew the ice off. So crazy adjacent, different views, diversity, all of a sudden, Yogi Bear prevails. So just remember that. You need a Yogi Bear in your team somehow. Possibly not. I think you really need some volume of air. Yep. So another one that I just wanted to touch on, collaboration just gets banged around the whole time, but really what does it mean? That's an important thing I think we need to land. So when we've thought about collaboration, we came to the realisation quite quickly through Ventusys and other things that it's unlikely all the skills you need are resident in your business. So you've got to accept that. You need to be able to deal with the challenge of thinking about bringing others in. It can be quite challenging in an engineering space if you're saying there's others out there that might have better, smarter, different ideas. That can be a challenge, but the rewards are great. And it's a key driver to accelerating the innovation, as we found in numerous instances. Just want to touch on a couple of different ways that collaboration can occur, and some of them are a bit novel. So GrabCAD's one that I actually used a few years ago, and it's a cohort of about 2.4 million mechanical engineers that all collaborate via an online platform, and you can run challenges for status, for money, for other things, as a way to look outside your business for great ideas. And thinking outside that square is a way that you can land elements quite quickly to accelerate your program. NASA uses GrabCAD to help solve small problems, not putting something on the moon, but maybe the spring in a widget that goes on something that goes to the moon, for example. So looking outside that box can be very fruitful if you're open to collaborating. COIC is the acronym for Charge on Innovation Challenge. I'll cover that in a bit more detail later. That's another really interesting way of looking outside your business to go fast. Here we go. So Charge on Challenge is something that we've participated in from May last year. It was BHP, Rio Tinto and Vale saying, we believe by collaborating with others, we can potentially solve a really big issue, which is electrifying haul trucks and decarbonising mining operations. So the size of the prize is the elimination of 4 billion litres of diesel fuel burnt every year. It is massive. So they took the approach of not trying to do it themselves, even though they have active programs in their business, and they went to crowdsource a solution. So there were over 300 initial responses, of which 86 were substantive. It went down to a short list of 21 that then resulted in 8 organisations being, finalists. Us and our collaborator Tritium, the EV charging company, were 2 of the 8. And we've been one of the winners announced of the Charge On Challenge. So 2 Australian-based companies put a solution together which you'll see in a second is kind of novel when you look at the scale, but not when you think about applying the application back into probably what you have in your workshop at home. So really different way of thinking about crowdsourcing to solve something. The externalisation of problem solving, and the diversity of thought. I think there was probably some pretty wacky solutions they saw come through, and ultimately there were some really cool ones as well. So our solution was no different to the battery drill you have in the shed at home. It just happened that the battery was the size of a 20-foot shipping container and weighed 17 tonnes. And we chose, again, very, very actively to not do some of the solution because we wanted to collaborate with someone who could do it better and quicker than we could, which was Tritium. Quite an amazing project. We were talking about it yesterday at this strategy day, and the team that worked on it in doing all the presentations actually found that COVID was a positive in that they could navigate remote working, and that the timelines in submission for charge on challenge elements were really short, but it helped them work towards getting good as opposed to perfect, and that's all we needed to demonstrate the viability of our concept. So there were some real positives that came out of a whole range of things in, I guess, ultimately submitting something that was successful. So what are the sorts of things I think that people should be thinking about in their own organisations if you want to move faster and get more agile results in innovation? Can't keep saying enough. You can't change and stay the same. So that's a massive lean in. You have to go looking for others that may be able to offer something that is part of answering the question, is this the best way to do it? Because internalising things isn't always the best way. So who else could help? And the new approaches will be a challenge in your business, particularly if you've got tech people or you've got ones that have particular domain knowledge. Bringing others in can be a challenge, but at the same time, if you set it up, you can go further, faster. So you really have to think about how your organisation innovates. It's very different from, is your organisation innovative? The methodology behind how you do it is something that you need to be prepared to challenge. You've got to listen to others. Don't just get your brightest and smartest and think that their voices are the only ones to manage and hear. You have to listen to other people. Sprints is really important. That's also part of shifting the dial on traditional, if you like, project management of something like this. You really need to get a lot of feedback as you're powering through, and you have to at times lean into the bad news. Stop, pause something, re-vector. Be prepared to manage what that means to people if they've invested a lot in what's gone on. I don't like to fail fast, I want to win fast. So that concept of moving quickly, again, can be challenging for traditional organisations. So think about winning fast. And most importantly, who's going to be in the team? Who is the best, or who are the best people in your organisation and outside to do this work? Because it may not be the person that has a title or sits in a reporting line or lane. It could be others. And we've found that in our business. There have been some gems that we've uncovered that don't sit in a traditional box that you can tick. So the constant asking of, is this the best we can do? If it's not, what's something different? Can we do it better? Can we go in another direction? It's that challenge to yourself the whole time. So that's just a really quick snapshot, and I would love to talk for hours about some of this stuff, but I've got only this much time, so I'm happy to take any questions if people have any.